Can you make an entire story out of the call to adventure trope from the hero with 1,000 faces? Neil Gaiman attempts to do that. I discuss this and more on today's episode. Welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today, it is just a regular day, and I am on that graphic novel grind, talking about talking about one of the regular authors that I talk about, one of my favorites. And today's story is all about the call to action, call to adventure, and magic. I am referring to the Books of Magic by Neil Gaiman, which was also illustrated by John Bolton, Scott Hampton, Charles Vess, Paul Johnson, and it was written in 1993. I've talked about Neil Gaiman on this channel before, so I don't need to go into that great of detail. But for those who don't know, he is a British author who is known for the Sandman series in particular, which I highly regard, as well as other graphic novels and comic books. And he's written some books such as Neverwhere, American Gods, other ones that I'm forgetting, The Ocean at the End of the Lane, and several others which are good and of lesser quality. So very well regarded, having won a number of awards, and his works have been adapted into movies and TV shows. What I find interesting about this, as other people have pointed out online, a book or a story about a young boy magic user who wears glasses and has dark hair. Say, couldn't you make an entire series out of that, set in a famous castle by the name of Hogwarts? I just find it. I don't think J.K. Rowling plagiarized this, but it is interesting to know the similarities. This would go on to become a little bit of a series, where Neil Gaiman wasn't taking as much part after Volume 1 here. But Timothy Hunter's story would continue, which I find to be a bit interesting. It's just interesting how it kind of draws so many similarities. There's even an owl right there with the Harry Potter series, although there isn't some big evil in this series. Although that's one of the main ideas that Gaiman is touching upon here. So without further ado, let's talk about the Books of Magic. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we'll move on from there. So the Books of Magic focuses primarily on Timothy Hunter, a young British boy who has the potential to be a great magician, and a group of magic users, John Constantine, who I've talked about before, Dr. Occult, the Phantom Stranger, Mr. E. They all gather to talk about his potential and trying to figure out what to do about him, also noting that other people are around that want him killed. Mr. E in particular wants him killed because he's pure and he believes only in good versus evil, and he sees the capacity of evil in Tim. But John Constantine convinces them all to try to talk to him and train Tim. And they find him on the street. He runs away because, of course, what else would you do with 4 strange men in trench coats? But eventually he agrees to talk to them, and he's hesitant about magic, but he decides that he'll want to learn. The Phantom Stranger then takes him into the past and shows him the history of magic from different cultures and what Tim's heritage is there. John Constantine then takes over and takes Tim to America, where they are just looking at the current state of magic and how magic is used and their irrationality and all of that. But along the way, that Tim learns that there are dark forces that want him dead, and Constantine is fighting them. He even goes to India, which is sort of off screen, and takes part in a massive battle of good versus evil, which we're told is epic, but we don't really see there. And others are trying to dissuade Tim about using magic, saying it's not all that it's cracked up to be, and that it'll actually ruin your life. And Tim doesn't really listen to those people initially. And then Constantine also introduces Tim to Zatanna, another magic user, who shows him around a party that is filled with good and bad magic users, or people that she calls evil, but who say that there's no such thing as a dichotomy of good versus evil. It's really just how you choose to use the magic and the power that it brings you. After finishing up with Constantine, Tim is then handed over to Dr. Occult, who takes Tim into the fairy realm and shows him the other realms of possibility. He tells him not to stray from the path and also not to take any gifts from strangers. And unfortunately, he strays from the path and is kidnapped by Baba Yaga. Fortunately, Dr. Occult saves him and threatens to reveal Baba Yaga's real name if they don't let Tim go, to which Baba Yaga obliges, because that would give Dr. Occult some magic or some power, or even Tim power for knowing the Baba Yaga's actual name. And then they go and visit Titania, who is the queen of the fairy realm. She gives Tim a key which can open up other realms, and he visits those realms, including the Dreaming, where we see King Morpheus, who I've talked about on this channel before in the Sandman series. It was fun to see Morpheus again. And then they make their way back to Titania, where she reveals that Tim isn't allowed to leave because she gave him a gift and the key, which he accepted. He responds by giving her a magical egg called the Mundane Egg, which can crack and create an entire new world, which is very valuable in this realm. And so she decides to let him go. From that point, he's then handed off to Mr. E, who takes Tim into the far future and shows him what is to come of magic and the possible futures that might happen, including one where Tim turns evil and kills Constantine as well as many others. And once they get to the far future, where the world is seemingly ended and the universe is coming to a close, Mr. E decides at this point that he wants to kill Tim because of his capacity for evil, even though Tim is a young boy. Fortunately, he's saved by Death, King Morpheus's sibling, who has come to claim both fate, destiny, and the universe. And she decides to send Mr. E back to the present the long way around. He's going to have to walk that way. And she just decides to send Tim to the point where he originally left. Where at that point, Tim is asked, do you want to become a magician or not? And Tim decides, because it is pretty scary, that he's going to reject the magic. But as the others leave, he's like, I don't want that to happen. But it seems he's made his choice. And then Constantine is talking with the others, and he's mad because it seems like the Phantom Stranger kind of made Tim's choice for him. And Constantine even implies that the Phantom Stranger maybe lied to Tim, but we don't really see how he might have lied. And as Tim goes home, he's a little bit upset about everything. But as he's in his bedroom, he notes I don't need to play their game in order to have magic. I just need to believe. And the owl that has been following him around the entire story sort of materializes again, implying that he's going to be able to actually use magic, even though he might have rejected it. And that's where the story ends there. In terms of analysis, there's a fair bit to talk about with the books of magic. What's really interesting is that Neil Gaiman sort of builds this entire story, as I said in the introduction, out of the call to adventure trope. Gaiman presents a story of Tim's ongoing initiation. It's just him being told about magic, and at the end of the story, there's the option for him to continue to engage in this and actually go on the official adventure and live his life that way. But it seems like he doesn't make that choice. So you have the hero with 1,000 faces is popularized by Joseph Campbell, where you have the hero set up to go on this journey. They cross the threshold and go forward, go on their adventure, and then they have a hard time coming back across that threshold again because they're so changed by their adventure. And it seems like that's where Neil Gaiman is leading, but he stops at the call to adventure. This entire story is just that. It's seeing like, here's what is on offer for this young boy, what he has to consider. Is he going to make that leap? Is he going to go to that adventure? And I think that's a very fascinating kind of story to tell there. And it also centers the magic rather than the boy as the sort of focus of the story. But you do have like other tropes here, like the meeting of the queen, which you could argue Titania is the meeting of that queen. But there are actual queens that he does meet, like Titania and the queen at the end of the universe, who might actually just be a construct of the universe's imagination or something like that. So you do see some of those tropes in the story. And then, like, you see Tim's hesitancy of even crossing the threshold. It's a bit scary. He might lose his father in the process. It's a lot of responsibility to take, especially for such a young boy. But he has the potential for great power, so he has to make this choice. And ultimately, he decides to refuse, which is a very powerful choice, because he's saying, I'm content with my life. I don't need this hassle. I don't need these dangerous futures. I don't need to believe in magic. And so he's rejecting that life. And he's refusing that call to adventure, which you don't often see in stories. It's usually mainly because if you don't have that, or if you don't heed the call to adventure, you have no story. But Gaiman is saying, well, you could debate the merits of going on that adventure, and that could be the story. Which, it sounds boring, but it's actually very interesting, and the art is very amazing here. So I think it really lands. Unfortunately, I think the ending of the story kind of undermines what Neil Gaiman is attempting to do here, because Tim refuses. He says, no, I don't want to do it. And, once Constantine and everyone leaves, he's like, oh, darn, I didn't actually mean that. But he made his choice. That has consequences. Unfortunately, once he gets home, he's sitting in his bedroom and he's like, all I got to do is believe, and voila, like magic begins to happen. And that's interesting, but it undermines what Neil Gaiman is going for here. Maybe he's trying to say, like, it doesn't matter what choice you make, like, you can make many choices that lead you to magic, which is interesting. But given that the entire story is that call to adventure, and Tim chooses to refuse that call to adventure, you can't just have him, say yes or I believe, because that undermines the choice that he made. Like, your choices have to matter in a story, and for someone like Neil Gaiman, who seems so intentional in his storytelling, this feels a bit weaker in my opinion. Gaiman is also touching upon good versus evil in the books of magic. Gaiman argues that the dichotomy is simplistic in this story, that it's not just Timothy can be good or Timothy can be evil. How he uses the magic matters as much as what he's using it for, and what that power does to him is important as well. As Mr. E says, as he's taking him into the future, this is just but one future for Timothy, depending on what choices he makes. It doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to do evil things. And even if he kills Constantine, who's to say that that was inherently a good choice or a bad choice? Sure, it's like killing your friend is a bad thing to do. There is a sense of morality, but just living by that good versus evil duality is rather simplistic. There's even one character who says that specifically to Timothy in the story. Allow me to read you a quote from this. It's not black magic versus white magic. I tend to think of it as live magic versus dead magic, but even that's simplistic dualism. Additionally, magic, even dark magic, isn't Satanism, although I've dealt with the odd devil in my time. Magic is about power. It's seeing through the shadows to the real world beyond. And that comes from a character named Tanarak, who is one of Zatanna's acquaintances, who she dubs as evil, but he's like, no, that's simplistic. There's much more to my power that I'm using, and there's a reason why I'm using it that maybe Zatanna is choosing to ignore, that Zatanna has labeled bad for no reason. Of course, if Tanarak is using it to kill babies, obviously that's a bad thing and needs to be stopped. But there are other things that you can use that power for that aren't necessarily just simply good or evil. And paired with this, you have Mr. E's sort of obsession with purity in the story. As Constantine notes, his father was a religious sort of whack job, obsessed with purity. So when Mr. E was young, he looked at a beautiful woman, and his father blinded him as a result. And so he's obsessed with this purity of good versus evil, seeing that even Tim has the tiniest capacity for evil. That must mean he must die and be washed away from the overall counter of the world, so that only good things remain. Of course, you can see the problem with killing a child before he's even accepted the call to power, the call to adventure. He hasn't really made his choices that merit a need to attack him or fight what he's trying to do. I think Gaiman is showing Mr. E's obsession here is wrong, and it falls into that simplistic mindset that makes you do even worse things. Tim's future is in flux. Of course, again, choices are what matters. And I think John Constantine is Gaiman's sort of model of morality here, where Constantine isn't simply good or bad. He's capable of many things, and sometimes that puts him in the hero's path. Sometimes that puts him in a villain or anti-hero's path. And it just highlights how you can't just follow the path that Mr. E might be following. Neil Gaiman is also myth-making here, which I've talked about with some of his other stories. He's building up the world of magic, talking about the past of magic, where it's come from, where it's going in the far, far future until the end of the world, and the other realms that exist within our realm, and sort of how that magic is used and all sorts of things like that. He's really telling the story of magic, and he's doing it within the boundaries of this superhero world that he's created. Gaiman does this in a lot of books that he's written, American Gods in particular, but also The Ocean at the End of the Lane. Sort of telling a story in a way that's building up a legend of something. In this case, it could be, Timothy Hunter's path towards magical enlightenment or something like that. And it's really fascinating. I've talked about Neil Gaiman's myth-making to death, but he and Alan Moore are both people who really love building up those types of worlds and expounding on what these myths mean, and just adding more dimensions to the world that they've created. Here's the world, but also here's what these people believe. Here's how it functions. As you've probably seen throughout this video, there is amazing art. The pages are awe-inspiring in this volume. They even feel magical, which really adds to the overall message about magic here. I think the four people listed here, Bolton, Hampton, Vess, and Johnson, really knock it out of the park. This is about as beautiful as the last volume of the Sandman series, which I can't remember the name of, but it's incredibly beautiful, and I've really gotten that feel for many of Neil Gaiman's story. He really knows how to either do art or find people who know how to do art. And as I mentioned earlier, the ending does feel pretty cheap. My biggest problem with it is there's no real decision. Gaiman has Timothy make a decision, and then he retracts that decision. So it's why am I even here? If your characters aren't going to make decisions that matter, then your story feels a little bit meaningless. It doesn't sink the story totally, but again, that's a big hindrance if the ending of the story, where the big choice that matters, is retracted 5 minutes later. It's weak storytelling, in my opinion. Anyway, those are my thoughts on the Books of Magic by Neil Gaiman. A really good graphic novel on his part. I really enjoyed the story, especially the art that was present here, and I felt like I really fell into it. I really became enveloped in the world that he was trying to create, which is always a plus when you're reading something. I definitely recommend it to you out there, despite the ending, and the progress towards there is a lot of fun. So go check it out at your local library, like I did. They might have interesting books there and graphic novels. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, leave a comment if you have something interesting or important, or just not even important to say. You just want to comment on this book. But yeah, like, share, and subscribe, or join the Discord so that more people can find out about the Books of Magic or this author, or just have further conversations in the Discord. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and magical travels. Farewell.